Hey, Dana. Thanks for joining me for a drink.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm Bryan. I'm told that there's some challenges that you're having that I might be able to help with.
There are. It's great to finally meet you, and we're just really struggling with our DevOps transformation. There's just feels like a lot of pressure to make all kinds of changes everywhere across the whole organization, and it's really stressful for us. It feels like we need just a better method.
You know, I've talked to a lot of organizations, and they repeat the same sort of story. But I think that I might be able to help you out.
That would be great.
I'd like to introduce you to the Scaled Agile DevOps Maturity Framework.
I've never heard of that one before.
Yeah, well, it's really focused on enterprise transformation without the risk of culture change.
Oh, that sounds perfect, because changing our cultures has really been the hardest part. It's so hard to do. So I think already this framework sounds like it might be exactly what we need.
Well, I hope so. You know, there's a few core principles in the framework that I think might help. Let's see if it speaks to some of your problems.
Fabulous.
The first principle is build quality in.
Yeah, and we have been struggling with quality. Our developers don't like having to learn to write tests and have to code too. Do you have a better way to build quality in than that?
Yeah, it's really common. It takes a lot of effort to learn how to test. It really should be a separate concern from coding. But what we have is the principle of the quality software comes from quality people.
That sounds reasonable.
It's obvious when you say it.
Yeah.
And so to kind of find the quality people, what we have the tribunal ceremony. And so this is a monthly ceremony where we collect data from the last release, and we identify and remove the person who created each defect. Because if we remove the sources of poor quality, our average quality should increase.
That sounds a lot easier. I mean, we can just push everything to production and then weed out the coders who create the defects. And then our good coders, that's all we'll be left with are good coders. And good coders don't really need a test because they're really good. So they won't have to do all that learning that they're complaining about.
Yeah, and it really reduces the cognitive load. And in addition to that, since they're not writing all that test code, they can produce more output.
That's a wonderful idea.
The next one is work in small batches.
We have a problem with that too. Gosh. It's like most of our time is spent figuring out like how to release all these tiny different things and which releases are going to affect other releases and when we can or can't release all these little things without breaking other things. It's a mess. I mean, microservices are all the rage, but oh my God, trying to coordinate them is ridiculous.
And I imagine trying to track all those version numbers, and it must be a nightmare.
It is.
Yeah. So what we do is we have the DevOps release convoy, and it's because the frequent releases it causes too much effort and cognitive load. You know, we have to track all these things, and so instead of 5 or 10 releases per quarter, we batch into a small batch of one easily managed release in the DevOps release convoy.
So a smaller number of batches.
Yes, and I'd like to point out that there's other scaling frameworks that use other release metaphors. So trains. But the problem with trains is they can go forward and sometimes back up, but they can't turn. A release convoy, because it's the metaphor is a series of ships.
Right.
It can go forward and reverse, but it can also turn.
Sounds much more agile.
It's much more agile.
Oh, this is we're right on track, I think, with what we need to be doing, what we need to learn.
Absolutely. And the next principle we're going after is everyone is responsible.
Yeah, we've been working on getting our product teams aligned and get them to really own their products and feel responsible for them. But it's really hard because, you put a bunch of people together on a team and they'll have different priorities, maybe different goals, different desires, right? And some really don't want to share responsibility for things. And so sharing responsibility, or that whole idea of everyone being responsible, has been really, again, a culture change that's just been really hard to implement.
I'm sure. And, it's the real challenge there also is the most important thing is how do we hold individuals accountable?
Right, right.
Right? Because the tribunal won't work if it's like shared responsibility.
Sure.
And so what we have is individual effort is really what matters. Each individual code engineer is responsible for their own work. And so individuals should be rewarded or punished, for the work they do. It's not fair to reward an entire team because of one excellent coder on their team.
Right. That's fair. We certainly need to be able to make sure that people are responsible for their work. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah. The next principle, and this one's very important, is psychological safety.
Yes. I'm really glad you're bringing this up, because I'm sitting here just kind of thinking through everything you've talked about so far, and thinking about the tribunal, and it's got great benefits of getting rid of the coders who are making the defects, and I think it'll have outstanding rewards when we're in a position where we only have good developers on teams. But then I started thinking about the psychological ramifications and the stress of having to fire all those people.
Yeah, and that's very common. We have a lot of empathy for management and the struggles they go through in trying to make sure that they weed out the chaff. And so for that, we have a new product we have put together called Peopleware. And Peopleware is human resources as a service. What it does is it puts a buffer between staff and management and uses individual performance data mixed with machine learning to automatically give resources the opportunity to the opportunity to find other positions where they might be happier. And in fact, you don't even have to be involved. What Peopleware will do is it'll analyze all the data and then just send them an email and then deactivate all of their accounts.
Wow, yeah. And machine learning, you can do all that with that?
Machine learning can do everything. And what this does is it allows us to avoid conflict, confrontation, and make sure that management feels safe.
Wow. I think Peopleware is going to solve so many problems for me. Let's see. I guess I do have another question. So far, I see the whole thing about making sure that we only have good developers, and also how to reduce the cognitive load of so many releases. Right, we got that wrong. We kind of were going for lots of small releases instead of a smaller number of patches.
Yeah.
And but another thing we really struggle with is planning. How what are we going to do? How many developers are we going to need? What are we going to, how does this framework have anything that helps with with planning features and planning things?
Planning is so important. We really need to make sure that we're on the right path.
It really is, and we constantly struggle with it.
Yeah, and planning is one of those things that it's one of those practices, and I'm glad you talked about that, because we have several practices that I want to introduce you to, and we'll start with planning. Okay. Right? So for planning, we have the Convoy alignment ceremony. Okay? And the Convoy alignment ceremony is a 5-day meeting that happens every 6 weeks, where we plan the next 8 quarters of features. This ensures not only that critical paths are aligned between teams, but the teams have a clear understanding of the work that's expected for the next 8 quarters, so that they can be held accountable to that.
Wow, okay. That's amazing. It took me a second to absorb that, but we are definitely not spending enough time thinking ahead like that. And planning 2 years out every 6 weeks is brilliant. That will allow us to be really agile.
Absolutely.
All right. Oh, great. Let's see, another thing that we kind of have problems with on our product teams is that sometimes the work for certain teams gets a little low, like because we've all lots of different teams supporting specific products, and don't always need a ton of work, right? So we don't really feel like we're getting our full value for what we're paying them for if they're doing other tasks that's not just heads down coding on the product.
So, just so I understand, after a feature is done, the team remains together?
Yeah, that's what we tried to establish, so that we got the product teams. I mean, I've read about this in some other literature.
No, I think you misunderstood product team.
Possibly. I mean, I hope that your framework has something that can help me with that.
It does. What we have is we have the press gang ceremony. And so what the press gang ceremony is that first we identify feature captains. And a feature captain is a senior manager who's responsible for delivering the next feature. And when they are assigned the feature, then they go to the coding pool and select between 2 and 20 code engineers.
The coding pool?
Yes.
How do you build a coding pool?
Well, it's the collection of code engineers that aren't currently assigned to a feature team. Hopefully we keep that pool small, but, there's always going to be small gaps.
Do I have to pay them while they're just sitting in the pool?
Unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
But what we do is we just make sure we have enough features coming in to keep the coding pool as small as possible. Hopefully they'll only be in the pool for a day, maybe 2. And so what the feature captain does is he goes out there and collects the number of code engineers he needs for the next feature to be released. And what this does is it ensures that each one of the coders has the ability to flex around and experience new and interesting technologies and business problems, and make sure, most importantly, that they're as much as possible fully utilized.
Awesome, yeah. So it sounds like they could even use that time that they're in the coding pool to go explore things like machine learning and
No.
AI
They
and all
won't.
kinds of
They
new
won't be in
things.
there that long.
No.
We really need them heads down coding. That's something. Exploring new things like that, really should be happening on their own time.
True. Well, press gang sounds amazing. We will need to start those right away, I think, so we stop wasting money on developers who aren't pretty much fully utilized and constantly coding. So, what about CI/CD? Those acronyms seem a little overloaded in the industry.
Yeah.
And how does SADMF help with understanding how to execute CI/CD?
Yeah, CI/CD is there's a lot of confusion around CI/CD in the industry. And what we've done is we've improved it. So I'd like to introduce you to CI/CD ED.
ED.
Yeah. So with continuous isolation, continuous deliberation, and eventual delivery, what we do is we make sure we have all of the process needed to ensure the highest level of adherence to SADMF process. Make sure we have real-world manual testing, because applications are only tested well if they're tested the same exact way that end users use them. We have all of the supporting documentation required, and this could be, all of the technical specifications, any sort of release notes, the documentation about why we chose to do things the way we did, just to make sure that we have everything needed so that when we present that to executive leadership, and there's multiple layers of executive sponsorship required to ensure that everybody's on board with this change so that we can eventually deliver the perfect thing.
Wow, okay. It took me a minute to I thank you for explaining that. You just keep amazing me. This really feels like the framework of the future, and I really appreciate you helping me understand how we should kind of move forward with the whole CI/CD or CI/CD ED now.
Yes.
And that's great. And it sounds like it really is going to help us with all that process adherence and making sure that our standards are upheld. But what about the like coding standards at the coding level with developers?
Yeah, coding standards is important. If we don't have strict coding standards, it could be really hard for the coders from the coding pool to work on the next feature and onboard quickly.
I can see that.
So what we have is the Enterprise Architecture Review Board. So at the enterprise level, they are responsible for maintaining the Book of Names. And the Book of Names is the absolute law for how to name variables, how to name classes, or even how to name files. And what this does is it ensures that as code engineers leave the coding pool, work on the next feature, on the next feature team, that they won't be confused by the code they see because it adheres to the Book of Names. And the Enterprise Architecture Review Board, they have a very important job. They meet every 6 weeks to review and reject any new words or modifications that have been submitted in the previous 6 weeks.
Ah, yes. All right. We are definitely currently missing that level of detail in our standards.
Causes confusion.
Yeah, I think this will make a world of difference. Yeah, I do have one more question for you before our time's up here. But how do we measure success with this framework?
Measurement's incredibly important. If we don't measure, then we really don't know that we're getting better or worse.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how does SADMF handle that?
So there's several metrics that SADMF covers, but I'd like to talk to you about two.
Okay.
The two that I think are most important. The first one is productivity. And we measure that by lines of code per code engineer. Right? Now, so this is important because earlier on we're measuring the defects so that we can build quality in. Right? But if all we do is measure defects, it can cause a perverse incentive. It might cause code engineers to feel they need to waste their time doing the job of unit testers. Okay? And the unit tester role and the code engineer role, those are two separate concerns, and they need to stick in their lanes. Okay? So what we do is we measure lines of code per code engineer per day to verify that they are improving their ability to deliver lines of code and not wasting time on things that are outside of their domain.
Wow. My organization is going to love this. All the metrics that we've tried, sometimes they just seem fuzzy. They're hard to get.
Yeah.
It's hard to dig in and find them. But lines of code will really let us have a very concrete measurement, and that's awesome. And it helps us figure out if our coders are actually fully utilized, and it's so important to keep track of. Wow. That is great for individual productivity. Do you have anything? What about measuring our organization overall, as a whole?
So, like measuring your transformation.
How we're doing on this new journey.
Absolutely. That's the other metric I wanted to talk to you about was the SADMF maturity score. Okay. Now, so this is a combination of metrics. One is the percentage of the organization that has a SAD certification, and so there's 3 levels. You have the SAD practitioner, the SAD fellow, and the SAD accredited facilitator. Now that's the highest level of certification.
So what's the difference in that certification?
Well, so the SAD practitioner has paid for a certification. Okay, the SAD fellow has paid for a more expensive certification.
Okay. Yeah, it's important to be a fellow, though. The titles matter.
Titles do matter. SAD accredited facilitator is not something you can buy. That's something you have to earn. That's something where you have to have demonstrated applying SAD principles to your organization.
Wow, that seems tough, but...
Yeah, and so that's one aspect. The other aspect is a quarterly survey of how the organization is working. It's short. There's only 200 questions, and using the survey, we can find out how closely the organization is adhering to scaled Agile DevOps principles and practices.
Excellent.
Because honestly, it's super important. Our customers care so much that we're using sad MF to deliver it.
And with that, with those, I mean, it sounds like the survey is, very comprehensive, so probably another very solid, concrete metric to go on.
Yes.
Yeah, this has been really great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking this time to help me understand the scaled Agile DevOps maturity framework. I plan to start certifying our staff right away, and I am sure that once we implement it, we'll really feel safe.
I'm sure you'll feel very, very safe. And I'm looking forward to everyone buying certifications. The Scaled Agile DevOps Maturity Framework, making enterprises feel better about DevOps since 2021. Get certified today.